This is System Crash. I'm Paris Marks.
And I am Brian Merchant. This week on the show, a court rules Anthropic can train on copyrighted works, but not pirate them. Elon Musk rolls out Tesla's Robotaxi service in Austin, and it goes about as well as you'd think it would.
Plus, Australia's social media ban for under 16s is moving forward. A new Fairphone is coming soon. Brian has a new series on his newsletter, and so much more that we'll be discussing later. You can support the show by heading over to patreon.com/systemcrashpod, where you can sign up to get monthly bonus episodes. This month, we'll be talking about the new movie Mountainhead. Expect that soon. Also, rate the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Now, Brian, did you hear the biggest news of the week? You know, the thing that is going to be most important to everybody's lives, which is that Big Balls is no longer at Doge.
You know, you joke, but every era gets the symbols and the metaphors that it deserves, and Big Balls running our government is right up there with where we're at right now. And the fact that he's out the door, along with Elon, along with some of these other clowns, look, I'll take the wins where we can get them. You know, the story this week is Big Balls is out and Zoran Mamdani is in. Mamdani, the openly socialist, upstart Democratic assemblyman in New York, has won the Democratic primary over the ghoulish Andrew Cuomo, who, everybody was like so sure was going to win despite over a dozen sexual harassment allegations and, you know, the controversies and scandals of his tenure as governor, when he let a bunch of, I think it was a nursing home that he just like failed to evacuate and people died of COVID. And instead he's like writing his book about how great he is.
And going on CNN to chat with his brother and have these really kind of puff piece interviews. You know what? I have to be honest. As listeners will know, I'm both not a New Yorker and not from the United States. And so when I started to hear about these stories, I thought it was the mayoral election. And I was like, oh man, this guy's running for mayor. This is great. But he has one more step to go until he becomes mayor. Now he's just the Democratic candidate.
Oh, right. You thought that this was it. Well, yeah. I mean, the reason why it's such a big deal is that like Democrats have such a stranglehold on politics in New York City that it's like, you know, an uphill battle to end all uphill battles for the Republican to get there, especially like seeing the enthusiasm that Mamdani was able to muster.
Yeah, and basically now he goes up against Eric Adams, right, who is the kind of, you know, incumbent mayor who, I don't know, broke the law. I can't remember exactly what he did.
Just like the funniest and worst scandals like ever. Like he just was like, he was like on the take with the Turkish government.
Right.
And he like, it was like expensive plane trips and stopovers and just like the silliest and most egregious corruption. Like whenever he traveled anywhere, he would get a stopover in like Istanbul and like get a hotel stay. Like they would just like they would like fly him first class and give him sort of like luxury hotels, things of this nature. In response, he would, you know, give like the Turkish embassy favors and things like that. I mean, that was just like one thing. There was like a portfolio of thing. He did weird stuff with crypto, of course.
Of course.
So he's going to run as an independent, because he's basically got kicked out of, you know, the Democratic Party for just doing nonstop corruption.
And he's basically like cozied up to Trump and, you know, the political right, in order to get pardons and to try to find some new allies.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we're kind of going down the rabbit hole a little bit here in non-tech matters, but yeah,
totally.
He sort of, in order to save his hide, he just like nakedly just kind of embraced Trump and, you know, just opportunistically just kind of, you know, has thrown his lot in with this weird, like, sort of not, because he's still not a Republican, and there is going to be a Republican mayoral candidate, Curtis Silwa, and there's going to be an election.
Well, and Andrew Cuomo had tens of millions of dollars behind him, you know, from people like Michael Bloomberg and, you know, Wall Street figures, but also from Palantir. You know, people associated with Palantir giving him money as well, trying to get him elected. And, you know, obviously Mamdani and a kind of New York mayoral race is not going to be the kind of key place where you're seeing tech policy. But, we took a look at his platform, and obviously there's some stuff in there about delivery workers and wanting to ensure that they have better rights and better pay, better ability to dispute deactivations and things like that. So that is something that is in his platform. And we know that New York City has been kind of one of the cities in the United States trying to lead on improving the rights of delivery workers and ride hail workers in the ways that are kind of possible to them on the municipal level, though again, not bringing them inside of kind of taxi regulations and things like that, as we'd probably argue for. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how this continues to play out. And it's great to see that he has won the primary. And you have to believe that a wider slate of candidates is probably going to be good for Mamdani as well, right? The more candidates in there, the easier it is for him to probably gain more attention and kind of move ahead would be my thinking. So I'm sure this will be one that, people on the left will be watching to see how it plays out, because it's certainly a race that could inspire a lot of hope there. And maybe the final thing I would say on Big Balls is that I'm very happy that we won't have to talk about this guy anymore. I still don't know his actual name, but I'm happy we will not have
to learn it.
Yeah,
Refuse
I'm happy
to
that
learn
we
it.
will not have to keep bringing up this random dude called Big Balls every few weeks. So, that's a win for me in my books. I'm saying
That's a win, and I'm choosing to embrace these two things happening at the same time as just like a faintest, like, look, we talk about the crumbling dystopia of Silicon Valley infused American project every week on here, it seems. I'm choosing to see these two trend lines as at least faint glimmers that we're headed in some senses in the right direction, or at least there's these countervailing forces. Because like, honestly, like, look, as an American, even way over in LA, like, people are cheering for Mamdani, right? Like, to have this inspirational figure who again, he's like very openly Muslim, embraces his faith, didn't hide that, as all like the consultant class would like chatter at him to do. He's a democratic socialist and didn't hide that either. He's very pro-Palestine, and he didn't hide any of these things, right? And New York City, the voter base of New York City is bigger than most U.S. states, or a lot of U.S. states. And so to see a victory, registered again by somebody, kind of, it's like flashes back to AOC and Bernie when they won. Again, in this context where every Democrat in the United States is being told to like move to the right, or to just sort of embrace a hardline view on immigration, or to just like not talk about trans people. Mamdani is openly pro allocating resources for trans people and for trans medical care. That's part of his open platform, and that's a departure from most other Democrats at this point. They're not even willing to touch those issues too often. So like, yeah, it is honestly, it's a overdue, much needed wave of good vibes. However fickle and fleeting they may be, it's a big deal here in the States.
Plus, he's only 8 days older than me, so I definitely got to root for him to win, right? Because he's
you're younger than, so good. You could
by 8
run.
days, yeah.
You're the mayor of Toronto. Paris
I think I would have to
Marks.
live in Toronto first for that to happen. No,
Okay.
no LA Mamdani's there, Brian. No big hopes over on your side of the coast.
Honestly, I do think that you hinted at this earlier. Like, I think that honestly, I do think that this is once again going to like sort of cause some ripples where people are gonna kind of get some ideas and say like, you know what, maybe I can. Maybe more things are possible, and maybe there will be more movement. We have a few. There's some city council members who have been sort of backed by DSA, but we're not a mayor. We don't have a mayor yet. Maybe I need to get my stump speech dusted off and
watch out, Karen
enter the
Bass.
fray.
Brian's coming for you. But listen, you're talking about the hopeful story, right? That people on the left are looking at as a sign where things could be getting better. But our kind of bigger story of the week is also a pretty shitty one when we're thinking about AI. Because of this court decision earlier this week involving Anthropic and a number of authors that had sued them, which is basically saying that, oh yeah, it had all of these copyrighted works that it trained its AI tool on. Well, that's okay because it's fair use, as long as the company is not pirating them. So, bring us into the story, Brian. What exactly happened here with this court case? What did the court find? What are the implications of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I've been looking at it. I've been looking at the case since it was handed down, and initially my response was like, "Oh shit," because on some important planks, it is not great, right? So there are a number of court cases like this happening across the country from creators, there's book authors, there's illustrators, there's writers, and there's a bunch of
Newspapers as well.
newspapers, the New York Times famously, and a bunch of other media outlets all have different cases. They're all structured a little bit differently. And this one was sort of one of the sort of smaller lawsuits that was taken against Anthropic. There's a big one from the Authors Guild that is also going forward, but again, they're all a little bit differently. But this ruling is interesting because the judge, William Alsup, ruled that, and so Anthropic, again, sort of the second place AI company behind OpenAI, not including the tech giants. It's like OpenAI. It's really like kind of in the AI startup sort of world. It's a two-horse race, and it's OpenAI and Anthropic. And Anthropic has tried to cultivate its reputation as being like the nominally more sort of ethical and careful and more interested in safety. And it's almost all BS, of course, but
Of course.
that's its line. So authors have filed this lawsuit that alleged that Anthropic ingested their works into its training models without permission, without compensating them in a way that damages their rights to earn a living, basically. And that's basically the gist of a lot of these cases. But William Alsup, who's the federal judge in this one, ruled that it was legal for Anthropic to train its models on copyrighted materials. And so that's the bad part, right? And he decided that it did not violate fair use. He makes this phrasing that is really common, or it was common for a while. You would hear it saying like, it's just like a child learning. And so it doesn't violate fair use if children use copyrighted materials to learn to read. So why is it a violation if these systems do it?
Right, which is like a complete misunderstanding of the technology, how it works, but is also, what the tech companies and the tech lobby groups have been trying to argue and have been trying to get, kind of recognized by the courts and to get people to accept. But also a lot of these tech advocacy groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation have been arguing as well that this should be a fair use kind of a thing, defending the rights of the tech companies over, the creators, the authors, and things like that continue.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna read this quote because I hate this line so much. And interestingly, like the tech companies themselves have kind of abandoned this phrasing. They kind of adopted it kind of ad hoc because I think some of the defenders, some of like sort of like the EFF set have kind of used it to say like, well, this is what an AI is doing, and we shouldn't, we shouldn't put limits on it. This would put limits on innovation. But the AI companies don't really use this line anymore because it still, in some senses, implicates them in ways that they don't want to be implicated. But so I'll read what Alsup wrote. He said, authors' complaint is no different than it would be if they complained that training school children to write well would result in an explosion of competing works. And he says that the Copyright Act seeks to advance original works of authorship, not to protect authors against competition. To me, this line of reasoning is just so preposterous because number one, it just sort of it collapses the capacities of a machine learning system that has limitless or near limitless compute and power at its disposal, and it can store limitless works in its databases. So saying that, it's comparable at all to like a child who's organically sort of working through material and reading like one book at a time to a system that just has all of these works sort of copy pasted in its database somewhere at all times and can draw from them in a specific and meticulous way. Is it in any way comparable to like the workings of a learning human mind? It almost seems bad faith. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I don't think that it is necessarily bad faith because I think this guy I've been reading a little bit about him. Judge Alsup he is like one of these sort of like Silicon Valley true believers, it seems. He thinks that like tech is is kind of inherently good, that innovation is progress, and blah blah blah, like that, that these companies are like on the frontier of building our future. It just kind of seems like that's where he's operating from, and that he's sort of like genuinely believes this stuff, that we're at one point the lines coming straight from the AI industry.
Right. He's the judicial equivalent of like a Kevin Roos in the journalistic world.
Yeah, exactly. He's Judge Roos. Yeah, Judge Roos and Newton. But, but. I've seen some folks weighing in that like it's not as dark as it may seem. So the ruling is just limited to the training, for one thing, right? So it's saying like training these works does not violate fair use. He doesn't go into whether or not producing creative works violates fair use. It still might, because that's when you get into actually competing with author materials. So the judge is saying AI companies can use copyrighted works to train their data sets, but it leaves open the question of what they do with them. So if they're just, facilitating the generation of novels that then go out and then compete with the writers on the market, that might be a violation of fair use. That door is still open. So that's important, for one.
Right. And I know that one of the criticisms of this suit was that the way that the authors had framed it was that they didn't actually show how the models were like actually kind of churning out or replicating the text in their own books, but were just kind of presenting similar things in the way that, if you think about, say, the recent case that Disney and Universal brought against Midjourney, they're like explicitly showing how this tool is churning out like stills from the movie to show that it has, it's basically trying to do the exact same thing. And apparently some of these other suits are doing exactly that, where they're saying like, look, these text generators are essentially taking what is in these books and kind of churning them back out, or you can get them to do that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and sometimes that's been sort of framed as like a criticism of the lawsuit, but also we have to keep in mind that there are different sort of strategies and different approaches from the legal teams here. And that approach sort of works if, for instance, your goal is to like point out that like, hey, this can collect this batch of images and reproduce them, and you are violating specifically these products or this intellectual property. And then you can go case by case. Doing that also tends to narrow your case, right? And they say, oh, well, it can do Disney and it can do that. But like, we don't know whether or not, because a lot of the cases aren't, they don't have like the bandwidth to sort of map out every single sort of potentially infringing property. So, it could result in the rulings of sort of, oh, well, yeah, it infringes Disney's copyright, but it doesn't rule on sort of the general principle underlying the systems. And so some of these lawsuits, I think, especially the ones brought by smaller teams, more class action, the Disney one, and I think it's like Disney and Time Warner, that is clearly bent on protecting very specifically Disney's intellectual properties and all their characters, which are very distinguishable, which are very, like, you'd be hard pressed to argue that, like, the intent of that lawsuit was to protect creators, right? That's to protect Disney's bottom line, right?
Absolutely. And just to be clear, it is a lawsuit from Disney and Universal.
Sorry, not Time Warner.
Not Warner.
Yeah.
Warner didn't join this lawsuit. And I think one of the things that is interesting, just on that lawsuit briefly, and then we can go back to discussing this one, is that I think when you're looking at these two big companies going after Midjourney, there was some criticism online that it's like, oh, they're going after like the smaller player, the more open source one, blah, blah, blah. But, I was reading and listening to some stuff in like the kind of entertainment media, and they were kind of explaining that the idea behind this lawsuit is to go after the company that has fewer resources to really kind of staff up a massive legal team, get a win and a precedent that then you can bring against these other bigger players like the open AIs because you've established it. And I guess when we're looking at this case that this judge is finding against these authors in favor of Anthropic, at least partially, I guess the concern there is partially that it also creates a precedent, right? So that then when you're looking at these other cases that are being brought, then potentially, those judges are going to look at what this earlier judge found and say, okay, well, we already have this ruling dealing with AI and fair use and copyrighted works. So even if, maybe the the kind of argument that you're making feels more legitimate or has more grounding to it than the one that this case was making, that maybe because this precedent is already made, then it's going to kind of make it harder for you to actually, achieve a ruling that would be in the favor of the creators, the authors, the writers, the graphic artists, and things like that. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely, I think, the goal of some of the small, like, there's an advocacy element where it is, you're trying to set a precedent that will protect people across the board rather than, just some corporate interests. And yeah, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of it's, obviously there's a lot of opinions about the best way to do that and the best lines to attack here. But like so far, what is kind of emerging, I think, as we don't have a ton of cases that have been ruled one way or the other here, but we do now at least have a couple. And now this one that didn't touch the fair use competition element did sort of like notably leave that door open. And as we'll probably talk about in a second here, it got into the piracy element because Anthropic, Meta, and probably OpenAI have built their data sets by pirating tons of material. And for them to be liable for all that material is a potential sort of major punitive measure against them. Like just the scale. If they have to pay damages for every copyrighted work that they ingested, then that's really something. But that said, the other case that we do have that was sort of, it predates the Chat GPT era a little bit, but it was that Reuters case where the key ruling there was that the AI company was producing images that competed with Reuters photography. And so there, the judge ruled that it did violate fair use because it was sort of unfair competition in the market because they were able to sort of use the works that were ingested into the system to then directly compete against creators, against like photographers. And that turned out to be the key element. So it is interesting. It seems like the judge didn't want to touch that or go into that element of the case, but it does seem like that area is going to be where creators, might find victory because it's pretty hard. I mean, I personally think it's hard to argue that, even training these systems on materials in a systematic fashion doesn't sort of violate copyright because you're still using all of that information to build for-profit systems that are, almost by definition being used to produce works that compete. But if you just sort of look at that half of the equation, I guess on principle, as this judge did, then you can sort of arrive at this conclusion. So that said, like the door is still very much open, and the fact that the judge said, I'm actually, going to force you to do another trial over the piracy element, I'm sure Anthropic is not happy about that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like on that piracy point, you kind of have two different aspects of it, right? There's the piece that you were talking about where, we know that these companies have used a ton of pirated works in order to train their models effectively, to make all these AI tools, to power them, all these sorts of things. So on the one hand, you could have this big process where they need to go through the databases, pay people whose works they pirated, because they did that. But then on the other hand, there's also like, if the finding is that as long as you have obtained some kind of a license to a work, then you can train on it. You can have this massive model that is trained on this book or these movies or what have you. Then that makes it so that they can, easily just buy up all this kind of stuff or buy some kind of rights to some database that legally has access to them. And all of a sudden it's fine for them to just train on all that stuff. And that also is potentially beneficial for them too. Sure, it adds a little bit of an extra cost, but there's like a legal dependability or whatnot in that case where it's like, oh, okay, we can pay a little bit to get access to all this data, but then we know that it can be treated as like fair use and kind of we can do whatever we want with it then, even if we're making, as you're saying, competing products and things like that. So yeah, there's a number of aspects of this that we're still going to have to see how it all plays out. Hopefully we can kind of pull this back more in the direction that we would like to see it so that these AI companies can not just do virtually whatever they want with all this material. But yeah, this is going to be an ongoing fight for a while yet.
Yeah, I mean, it is still just a mess and its creators are still struggling. And I think that that's the bottom line here is that this is happening right now, like to a lot of these writers and illustrators and knowledge workers and copywriters, and it's on and on and on. Like this isn't really a speculative sort of issue about legal theory. This is a material force that is eradicating their ability to earn a living, and it's showing up in sort of demonstrable and sort of powerful ways. So like just and almost regardless of what happens, it is still going to be insufficient. I think that just even if it's ruled that there are some limitations on what they can do with fair use, just we know, given the sort of the makeup and the capitalization of the AI industry and of big tech and the way that they conduct themselves and the level of concern that they have shown for, workers and creators, which is close to zero. They're going to power on ahead. They have armies of lawyers. Any sort of legal ruling would be a victory, but, primarily like a victory for probably, the big media companies or, Disney or Universal. So there's going to have to be more, I think. There's going to have to be organizing and mobilization, beyond these lawsuits, no matter what happens, even in the best case scenario. I can't imagine a world in which OpenAI or Meta decide to just to sort of, okay, well then, we'll play by the rules. They're going to try to find every way that they can to sort of protect their hordes of data, their right to wield it, their right to sort of do as they please, to move fast and break things. And, if they have to pay some fines, they can get those held up in the legal system too and pay things here and there. And it's a rearguard action, the AI class action lawsuits. And I think they're important and I salute everybody involved in them. But, I do think we have to understand that they are one piece of this resistance that needs to be staged, one piece of sort of the opposition to sort of the political economy of AI as it's unfolding before us.
I do think it's really interesting that the kind of ideas about copyright that are held by a lot of tech folks come out of this moment when the tech companies were far less powerful and influential, right? And it was often the big kind of like entertainment conglomerates who were the big bad guys who we needed to fight back against. And now when I see these AI lawsuits that are not like the class action ones, but are the ones being brought by like major newspapers, major publishers, major entertainment companies like Disney or Universal, like there is an element of me that's just like, let them fight. I like to see it play out. I like to see what happens. But on the other hand, I'm like, if I need to choose a side in this battle, I'm very much not on the side of the tech companies. And even though I'm not like the biggest proponent of copyright, I don't like to see copyright extensions and, those rules being hardened up. I don't know. I'm on that side of things right now, not on the side of letting these tech companies do whatever the hell they want.
Exactly. That's how you do have to think about it, is it's going to take every front. I 100%. We at System Crash salute every single artist and writer and author out there fighting these fights. They're really important, and they're, highlighting a lot of the ethical issues with what's going on. And they may yet engender, really, truly meaningful legal precedent. And that would be great. I'm just pointing out that we just need to also consider the fact that like these are like the largest companies on earth, and they no longer have really any interest in upholding the social contract as it once stood. So we have to be prepared to find other ways to fight them too.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, thinking about large nefarious companies dealing with AI right now, this is my attempt to pivot to our other major story that we wanted to talk about this week.
Well done, Paris.
Which is,
nice
of course,
pivot.
Thank you. Which is, of course, Tesla's rollout of its Robotaxi service, something that Elon Musk has been promising for years and years and years. People might remember back in 2019 when he said that there would be 1 million Robotaxis on the road in 2020, which, of course, did not arrive. Surprise, surprise. But now he finally has a Robotaxi service operating in Austin, Texas, which we understand has less than 20 vehicles available, is available to a very limited
Elon
number
Musk
of people.
Story: promise 1 million by the end of next year and get, in reality, 20 after 6 years. With I think don't they have drivers in them?
Some of them have drivers, not all of them. And it's currently very limited to early access exclusive people, which are basically like Elon Musk boosters, are the type of people who are getting access to this service early on, who are not going to be as critical of it. But even then, there's still plenty of videos coming out showing these robotaxis, so to speak, seriously malfunctioning on the roads of Austin, putting not just the people within the vehicles, but the people around them in jeopardy. Because as we know, as anybody following Tesla knows, this self-driving system is not ready for prime time, is certainly not ready to drive a vehicle by itself with no driver assistance. Even though it's called full self-driving or autopilot, the two different versions of the different systems that Tesla offers, these are driver assistance systems, right? They are not self-driving systems in the way that these companies often promote them. And Tesla has had to clarify that in response to legal actions and lawsuits and, threats of regulation in different countries over the years. This is not something that is unknown. And so now we have this system being rolled out, not so much because the tech is ready, but because Elon Musk needs to try to show to investors that there's some other big product that is going to justify the share price and the valuation of Tesla after all these years. Because again, as listeners will know, Tesla is a very overvalued company. That's valuation is well in excess of other car makers because Elon Musk promises that it's not just a car maker, but, a self-driving company and all this kind of stuff instead, which he has not actually been able to follow through on after all of these years. And so, we have been talking about how Tesla has been running into trouble with the vehicle models that it has, all these Cybertruck recalls and things like that. The fact it can't actually bring new mass market vehicles that a ton of people are going to buy, and how sales have been significantly declining in many parts of the world because of Elon Musk's political activities, but also because there is serious competition, in particular from Chinese EV companies. And so, the Robotaxi effort is his attempt to say, look, it's not just Waymo and these other companies who are running ahead with this, but Tesla is part of this game as well. And it is going to have this massive system that a ton of people are going to be using. But already very early it is becoming very clear that that is not the case. And it's funny watching some of these videos, Brian, because, and I'm sure you've seen some yourself, but you'll see the Tesla fans in these vehicles talking about how wonderful it is. And then the vehicle will totally fuck up and you can see that they're terrified for their lives. And within a few seconds, I have to pivot back to being this is what it's like to be an early Tesla adopter, and it's so great, and it's wild.
Whoa! All right, so we just slammed on the brake. I'm not exactly sure what just happened, but the car thought it saw something, and this happens in full self-driving. This is something that does happen. That's something that people have talked about being one of the limitations of full self-driving with Robotaxi, is that occasionally it slams on the brakes out of nowhere. You guys kind of saw me react. You can see that my stuff is on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that he still commands such sort of enthusiasm, and the cult of Musk is really quite fascinating to me, because you have to have if you're a tech head and he's making the first all electric Teslas, and they're these cool sleek looking cars. Look, I get it. Maybe you're on board, but at some point you just, I guess you just have to have fully bought in, and then now nothing is going to change your mind. Honestly, if you just started paying attention to Musk this year and he takes over the government, fucks everything up, everyone hates him, puts on a cheese hat in Wisconsin, leaves the government in disgrace. Meanwhile, his rockets are exploding one after another on the launch pad. Cybertrucks are falling apart. People are just pulling the paneling off with their bare hands.
That happens to all cars, Brian. What are you talking about?
You're right. And then now, it's here's the glorious launch of my cyber taxis, and they're just stopping in traffic and going the wrong way on. I mean, that's I'd laugh, but it's horrifying.
Totally.
I feel it was just a couple weeks ago or months ago that Tesla didn't stop when they threw a model child out in the road and it just blew into it.
Yeah, well, just ahead of the launch of this Robotaxi service in Austin, Dan O'Dowd, who of course sponsors the Dawn project, has been advocating against the self-driving system for some time, staged another one of these demonstrations where they essentially had this school bus stopped, with its kind of stop signs out, and they would have these dummies of children kind of crossing in front of it. And I believe in the video I saw recently, they tried it 6 times or something, and every single time the Tesla hit the dummy child and would have essentially seriously injured or killed it, right? Once again, showing the vulnerabilities, the problems, the fact that this system is really not ready for prime time, and certainly not ready to drive a vehicle by itself with no human ready to take over for it.
Yeah. And, one of the big things is that Elon has like long invade against sort of like the Waymo model, which you look at a Waymo car and they have much more sensory detection technology installed atop it. It has LiDAR, a laser system. It has that like sort of the spinning apparatus on top that makes them look so distinctive. And that's not because they look cool, but that's so they don't hit children when they jump out in the road. Waymos still have issue and they still have to be recalled. I think there's a pretty sizable Waymo recall just a couple months ago because they kept like driving into dividers or something. In classic Elon fashion, he's just like bullheadedly insisted that you don't need anything other than sort of like, the computer vision, which is basically sort of like, the image detection AI.
Exactly. Tesla cut out the LiDAR because they didn't want the expense, not
Right.
because it's not
Correct.
like necessary or something that is important to have for a system like this to work. It was just like, if he is selling these cars into a mass market, then this is going to add a significant additional cost if every single one of those cars needs to have a LiDAR system installed, because he's acting like this is, or, at least the way that this was framed previously was that this was something that individual car buyers were going to have to buy in their cars. And a number of them did pay for it. And then were kind of stuck in a so-called beta for years. Some of them even, kind of going back to the company and being like, I paid for this. Where is my service that I paid for, right? But even now, when you go to the launch of like the supposed Robotaxi or whatever, which also has like really dumb Cybertruck-esque kind of branding on the side of it, he still isn't putting the LiDAR system back in because he's trying to prove that all you need is, basically the cameras, the computer vision. You don't need the LiDAR system as well, which basically all the other companies trying to work on self-driving vehicles are like, this makes no sense. Like, This is essential.
It's a disaster waiting to happen. And honestly, like, I don't understand. The story that we're pulling from is by a friend of the pod, Laura Kolodny at CNBC. And, it shows how regulators have put the company on notice. But it's just like, why are we not shutting this thing down? Why are these things on the road? Honestly, if I was in Austin, I would be getting the hell out of the way every time I even saw one of these things coming down the pike. It's such a classic example of, the power that the tech industry in Silicon Valley has had to sort of instill its values, which is, again, to move fast and break things, even if they're like people's bodies, rather than have common sense, sort of preemptive protections and regulations. Like, there's no way that these things should be on the road. I'm sorry. Like, yes, we're critical of Musk on this show. Yes, we're biased, but yes, because we understand what full self-driving has meant over the years, that people have died as a result of putting their faith in full self-driving systems, or as a result of other people putting their faith in full self-driving, quote, full self-driving, right? That's the way that it's sold. But we, as you've just been walking through, there are severe limitations. There have been for years. We know about them. They've been demonstrated on camera for everyone to see. They've been widely disseminated. Like, there is no excuse for this being able to happen in a major American city. It's outrageous, and it's frightening. Somebody is going to die. Like, I don't know if they don't pull this in. You have cars driving down the street the wrong way, and you're not shutting it down immediately. What are you doing? We are critical of Waymo and Cruise and all the other ones too, but like, you can say at least they tested extensively on like favorable conditions where there were no people with at first. Then they sort of carefully expanded it, because I think Waymo knows that it benefits their reputation if they're not, hitting people, or the cars aren't seen driving the wrong way down one-way streets. Not because they have any great, benevolent concern for the public good. They're doing it because that's the way that it makes sense to do. But again, here we are in this era where, things have collapsed and norms have collapsed, and Silicon Valley has helped collapse them to where you can have robo-taxis or self-driving cars with nobody in them just wreaking havoc on an American city. And the regulators are like, we're going to look into this.
Well, and it feels like we've learned nothing from that Uber crash in 2018, right? Which, is all those years ago now. But we can clearly see in that case, regulators were too excited to get on the self-driving bandwagon to want these services to roll out. And so, in Arizona, they tried to attract Uber to come. And then Uber was really interested in rapidly kind of scaling up its service, even though its tech was not ready. And as a result, a woman died, right? And because of that, Uber then pulled out of the self-driving game. And even when you talk about Waymo and Cruise, we know Cruise was effectively shut down, last year by General Motors after it hit somebody in San Francisco and dragged them across the ground. And the service never recovered because of that. And the company basically said, we're cutting our losses on this. We're not continuing to pour more money into this effort to develop these self-driving systems. Waymo is the one that continues, but all you got to do is talk to some people in San Francisco and they will tell you about all the times that the Waymo system continues to mess up, to, kind of crowd into random neighborhoods, to stop randomly in the streets because it can't figure out what to do. Like, there's still a lot of flaws and vulnerabilities in these systems. And those are the ones that are using the LiDAR systems, right? That have been kind of taking it slow over many years to try to improve. That is not what we see with the Tesla system. It is very much a move fast, break things just to try to justify a valuation and just to try to ensure that Tesla isn't going to collapse and Elon Musk has some, next big thing to show off to investors. It does not matter who suffers, who is hurt as a result of that, as long as it works for Elon Musk's ego and for this company.
Yeah. And look, like I am also sympathetic to, the argument that with self-driving cars that like developed in a certain way. I mean, I think there need to be just clear-cut, totally requisite standards. Waymo should be required by law to make all of its travel data completely transparent and public. It's operating in public spaces. And that was one of the things that, right before the commission in California that sort of legalized or opened up for legalization self-driving cars on public streets. That was one thing that public advocates were calling for and that tech companies would not do. So there's no this stuff needs to be completely transparent. It needs to be open to third-party evaluators and investigators. There needs to be much more collaboration with with the transit boards and public agencies and watchdogs. All that said, I am sympathetic to the idea of you could feasibly perhaps get a self-driving car that, if it's, built right, could be safer than there's a lot of bad drivers out there, right? So on the safety front, I am sympathetic to at least the aim there. And I'm sympathetic to Waymo's stated line where it's we're trying to do things the right way. I may disagree with a lot of these moves that have been made, but look, if you're going to try this at all, then the wrong way to do it in every single bucket. And I think the thing that should be shut down immediately is everything that Tesla has done, everything that Elon Musk has done. It is the inverse of every sort of public, transit related goal that has been sort of developed over the last century of the automobile. We have best practices, we have public rules for a reason. This is just, I feel like it does make sense that it's happening now in this moment where, obviously it's happening in Austin and it's happening with the oversight of local governments, not the federal one. But it is just a reflection of the Silicon Valley sort of mindset taking over and the willingness to explode all of these norms and things that have, though very imperfect and though awful in a lot of ways, have, been built to try to protect people from speeding cars. And now we're just kind of throwing it all away because, yeah, Elon Musk, as you said, needs to sort of make a statement. Here's my hope, though. The House of Cards has been shown that it can come down, with Tesla takedown. It has been shown that, that this thing can be attacked and it can be sort of undermined. And there is a real, I think, the most fire that he's playing with is this one. If this hits somebody, if one of his cyber taxi hits a kid, I don't know. He seemed pretty untouchable for a long time, but if it hits somebody, that how does I don't know, I don't even know if Elon Musk's weird fan base, is enough to protect him from from consequences of a disaster. I just hope we don't see it. Honestly, this one has me kind of worked up a little bit because it's so bad. It's such a glaring example of everything that's wrong with sort of the current tech-led mentality of in governance.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Elon Musk has hurt so many people over the years that maybe I'm a bit skeptical that the robotaxi hitting someone would actually be the thing that does it. But maybe because, the company is so clearly the one who would be the blame there, maybe it would finally do it. I just wanted to add one point on what you were saying about the robotaxis and the Waymos, though, because as you well know, I wrote a book on this, and I'm maybe less hopeful on the kind of Waymo pitch, simply because for me, what I see when I look at those services is an opportunity cost, right? They are making the argument that we'll just use this technology that will improve the streets, that will make everyone safer. We've been waiting over a decade for them to really achieve that. And, you look at the work of someone like David Zipper, who has explained how all these other cities around the world outside the United States have been able to make the roads safer, to reduce road deaths, all this kind of stuff through, changes to road design and all these sorts of things that really don't require new technologies. So, it's not to say that like Waymo is the most evil company in the world or anything, but it's like, I think that they provide a justification to these lawmakers to like not have to take these actions that would actually make things safer a lot quicker than waiting for a self-driving service. And I know you're not arguing like in Waymo's favor and stuff, but I just wanted to add that piece into the discussion on it.
No, yeah, I'm glad you did, because just to clarify, like what I was trying to say is, in the context, if what you're saying is like we're trying to build a car that is as safe to drive as a regular car and it's autonomous and whatever, and like that's going to be our product, then like the way that you would do that project is more the way that like Waymo has attempted to do it, by trying to sort of collect data. Like that's I don't think Waymo's project is a good. I think our project should be getting cars off of the streets and building good public transit and building cities that are like, or talk about a city that's like built the inverse of the way that maybe is where I live in LA, which is overrun by cars and where transit is seen by too many as a joke. Though it still works. We take the train in LA on my Angelinos. It works better than you are led to believe.
I agree. Yeah. Though I haven't been in LA for a number of years, but when I used to take it, I used to find it work, perfectly fine.
It's fine. LA's big, and there's traffic, so it takes a long time to get places. But all that said, I've taken Waymos, I've ridden in them, and it is interesting. I took one when I was at the Times, and I did one like with a guided driver who was like overseeing in case like we had to brake or whatever. And there was only one time where it really like felt like it made the wrong move or whatever. It was a very limited thing, but I've since taken rides with them just to test them out and to see, and it's anecdotally data speaking, like, yeah, the safety wise, it seems like they go slower. They do sort of observe. One thing that's kind of funny that's happening is like people are like taking advantage of the fact that they follow all the traffic laws. And so like if they're stopped at a stop sign, people know that like people can cut in front of them because they won't, like if an LA driver who saw that happening, they'd like speed up and like try to cut them off. So it's been interesting. I'm trying to get my head around on what's going on.
Do you remember a few years ago when Elon Musk, I think it was Elon or maybe it was someone else at Tesla, kind of admitted that they had designed the Tesla autopilot system to basically like roll stop signs, like not to completely stop, and it's like that's illegal. Like that's not the traffic rules. Like,
yeah, Waymo too. Even Waymo had said like sometimes like because people would get mad that they were going 35 when it was like a big like 3-lane sort of road or 2-lane road where people were really driving 50 miles an hour. So people would just like go up behind them and honk and honk. So I think like there was some reporting, I think, that Waymo like would like allow them to go over the speed limit in some cases.
Wild.
Yeah, it's one of those things where to me self-driving cars are like broader AI, where it's like, sure, there are like a handful of use cases where like AI is like really is good and useful for automating a task or for like in select areas of scientific research. But that gets used to justify the entire project, which is like really just sort of like degrading labor, sort of like trying to build a monopoly, concentrating power. Waymo's like, sure, like in some situations, like there are probably very good use cases for self-driving cars. But for 99% of the reality, public transit is what we really want. Good, high functioning public transit.
Absolutely. And Zoran Mamdani will hopefully be building and expanding it in New York. But I think we should get to our final stories. This is my attempt to kind of wrap things up there.
Yeah.
I'll get us started. How's that?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So people might be aware that Australia is planning to ban access to social media for people under the age of 16 years old. Obviously, this is a very controversial thing. A lot of tech companies don't like it. I personally think there'd be better approaches, but, obviously we're going to have to go ahead and see what the Australians do. We're seeing movement in Europe to also do something similar over there. Well, the Australian e-safety commissioner released a report this week on the different potential ways that they would, basically check someone's age, clarify someone's age to get the public's opinion on what might be the best way forward, but also to talk about what might be feasible, what would still protect people's privacy and be usable. So you can see how this process is still moving forward. One of the things to really make the news this week, though, is that previously there was reporting that the Australian government explicitly exempted YouTube from this ban. While the e-safety commissioner is kind of saying that doesn't really make any sense to give them a carve out. So if we're really moving forward with this, YouTube should be in that ban as well. And as you can understand, Google is absolutely losing its mind about that.
I mean, that's even as a Luddite, like that is a hard proposition because so much of sort of, video watching has migrated online and onto YouTube in particular. But that said, like, I would, as a parent of small kids, like I would co-sign cutting off YouTube to young kids. 16 seems like a bit wild. Like maybe there's maybe first you can get it down to like 12 or something. I don't know, but still.
Yeah, YouTube kids, YouTube teens, YouTube older teens.
Right. What I do endorse is the willingness to like experiment with policy, right?
Absolutely.
What if Australia does this and they just it's just unequivocal that everybody is so much happier when they're not entranced by content that spools around from YouTube. Give it a go, Aussies, I say.
Yeah, or maybe they find that, okay, maybe their approach didn't work as well as they were hoping. And then maybe the Europeans look at that and learn from it and do something better, right? I think it's time, we've had these discussions on the show. I think it's well past time for some experimentation in tech policy and how we approach these things. And I don't think there's any denying in my book that, there are consequences that have come from social media that we should be looking at seriously reining in. That doesn't mean that, Jonathan Haidt is the guy who got it all right or anything like that. But also, I don't think that means that the social media companies completely have their hands clean in all this. And it's clear that they have been trying to downplay the impacts of their platforms for a long time. And I'm totally ready for us to start experimenting with what it looks like to bring them into line with our values and our expectations.
Bring them in. Build a better, less social media polluted world, I say. Give it a go. All the best to you, Aussies down under. Okay. Some other good news today. Wow, some an interesting social media ban. Big Balls is out and Amdani wins. Look at this. This is practically utopian for System Crash here. And now we have a new, smaller Fairphone. The Fairphone 6 has been announced, and it has swappable accessories. From The Verge, Fairphone has announced its latest repairable smartphone nearly 2 years after introducing the last upgrade. The new Fairphone 6 is smaller and 9% lighter than its predecessor, but it includes a larger battery that you can replace by removing just 7 screws. And that battery will power the phone for 53 hours on a full charge. And this one is also more modular. You can replace different accessories like a card holder and a finger loop can be attached to the back of the phone. So for those unfamiliar with the Fairphone, it is this laudable project made by in Europe that is supposed to sort of challenge the planned obsolescence and the sort of the sealed in nature of the common, iPhone or Android phone. And it's sort of premised on this idea that if you want to be able to replace your battery, you shouldn't have to use a heating apparatus and have a special kit. The folks at iFixit provide that you have to use a million different utensils to just get in there. The idea is, well, one of the biggest problems that phones face is that the battery wears out. And if the battery wears out, then most people just tend to replace their phone. But if you could just unscrew the back of your phone with 7 screws and replace it yourself, a lot of times you'll see that your phone just works as good as new. And the Fairphone is modular, so it makes it so that you can replace all those bits. It also attempts to sort of ethically source all of its parts on the supply chain rather than have them wind through places that use child labor neighbor like Apple has in the past. And so, yes, we're glad to see a new Fairphone and update. If this was easily usable with an American carrier, as for a long time it was not, I would use one myself.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool project. Great to see that they have another kind of updated one out there. I'll be interested to see, because in the past, as you're saying, they have only been sold in Europe. I wonder if at some point they will start selling them in North America, so it'll be easier for those of us over here to get access to them too. So yeah, we'll have to see how it goes, but very cool announcement. Next story, apparently, according to Elon Musk's lawyers, he does not use a computer. This is in, the lawsuit that we have talked about before between Elon Musk and OpenAI. They are in the discovery process right now, and OpenAI's lawyers are saying that Elon Musk's lawyers are not fully cooperating with the discovery process. And so in response, Elon's lawyers have said that, well, they're providing stuff about the mobile phone, but they can't provide anything about his computer because Elon apparently doesn't use a computer. That's despite the fact, which, is just ridiculous on its face. But let's remember that Elon Musk tries to present himself as a pro PC gamer who is leading the charts and all this kind of stuff. Dude obviously owns a computer. Let's be real here.
It's really a funny way to try to get at it. I know it's core to his persona, right? He's always let's see your code. And it's people at his companies. There are those funny stories about how people would have these huge monitors, and they would just get screensavers or things that looked like the Matrix to go down. So it just looked like they were doing super, complex futuristic coding just because it impressed him, because it's just so important to him to be seen as somebody who understands or is part of this sort of, hacker, super skilled computer culture. But yeah, it's funny on either front. Just the notion that the CEO of 7 technology companies doesn't own a computer. It's come on, buds.
Yeah, really though. All right, round us out, Brian.
All right, and bringing us home, I just wanted to share that I have published the first installment in the AI Killed My Job series, and this is a series that I'm doing at Blood in the Machine, at my newsletter, where I'm soliciting stories from people who have experienced AI coming into their workplaces, replacing their jobs altogether, sort of degrading or de-skilling key parts of their jobs. And since I put this call out, I can't count how many. I want to say hundreds of responses from people who have shared stories about their own experiences with AI. Most of them not good, you might imagine. So I've published that first sort of roundup. I've got stories from people at the tech giants, Google, TikTok, to mid-sized companies like Dropbox and CrowdStrike and startups. So it's I don't know. I'm biased, but I think that it's just, I got so many great stories. I want to thank everybody who shared them, who sent these in, especially in the tech industry right now. Criticizing AI publicly or criticizing your company is obviously very risky things to do sometimes, and very, very delicate. So people shared these stories with me at great risk, and I really think that they're some incredible stories and scary ones, and they're well worth reading. So check it out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading the series. Can't wait to dig in. Well, System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Robin Simon. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get monthly bonus episodes. Thanks for listening.